Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring some excerpts from
Okay.
common Buddhist text. Sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
But as we dig in, you'll see how this wisdom really comes to life. We're talking meditation, the nature of reality, even social and ethical stuff.
Uh-huh.
A full-on Buddhist buffet.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these excerpts, they don't just give us like information.
Right.
They help us understand like the core of Buddhist thought.
Yeah.
It's like a direct line to the principles that have shaped this tradition for centuries.
So before we get lost in the details, maybe we should start with the basics.
Okay.
Like, what exactly does Buddha even mean? I was reading that it's not a name or like a title.
That's right. It means the awakened one,
Okay.
someone who's woken up to the true nature of reality. And it's cool to remember that there can be many Buddhas, not just the one we usually think of, Siddhartha Gautama.
Right.
Some Buddhist traditions even talk about Buddhas across different universes.
Okay, multiple Buddhas across universes. That's a lot to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back down to earth for a sec. The text also mentions the three jewels of Buddhism. So what are those all about, and why should I care?
The three jewels are like the foundation of Buddhist practice.
Okay.
The Buddha, the teachings, or Dharma, and the community, Sangha. You can think of them as guideposts for your own journey. The Buddha provides inspiration, the teachings offer a path, and the community supports you along the way.
Right.
It's not just about you figuring it all out on your own.
So it's about connection and support, not just individual enlightenment. I'm already seeing how these ideas can be applied to life even outside of Buddhism.
Exactly. And that theme of interconnection really gets to the heart of things when we look at meditation,
Okay.
a core practice in Buddhism. There are two main types: samatha, which cultivates calmness, and vipassana, which cultivates insight.
Yeah.
Imagine samatha like training your mind to be still, like a peaceful lake.
Yeah.
And vipassana is about seeing clearly into the nature of reality, like the lake reflecting the sky perfectly.
I love that analogy. Two sides of the same coin working together to help us see things more clearly.
Yeah.
The source material also mentions 4 foundations of mindfulness. Are those connected to these types of meditations?
They are.
Okay.
The 4 foundations are all about paying attention on purpose to the present moment. It's about tuning in to your body, feelings, mind, and even the objects of your mind. Think of it like hitting the pause button on autopilot and truly experiencing what's happening right here, right now, without judgment.
So it's about bringing more awareness to our daily lives.
Yeah.
Speaking of awareness, there's that captivating story about the Buddha's own journey to enlightenment. He wasn't always the awakened one, was he?
You're right, it was a journey, and not always an easy one. Siddhartha Gautama initially went to extremes, practicing severe asceticism, essentially trying to starve himself to enlightenment.
Wow, talk about a tough lesson. It sounds like he discovered a more balanced approach was needed.
He realized the path wasn't about punishing the body, but about the middle way. It reminds us that sometimes we need to let go of extreme views to find true wisdom.
Right?
And this is where the concept of good spiritual friendship comes into play.
Uh-huh.
Just like the Buddha couldn't have done it alone,
Mm-hmm.
we all need support on our journeys.
That makes a lot of sense. We're social creatures after all.
Yeah.
The source material really emphasizes that the holy life is completely about good spiritual friendship. But what does that mean for us practically speaking? How can we cultivate those kinds of supportive relationships?
Think about the people in your life who inspire you, who challenge you to grow, who offer a listening ear without judgment.
Right.
These are the kinds of friendships that can nourish your spirit and support you on your path, whatever that path may be. It's about creating a space for open dialogue, shared learning, and mutual encouragement.
So it's not just about finding people who agree with you, but about surrounding yourself with people who challenge you to grow and learn.
Exactly, because life isn't always easy, and it's those strong connections that can help us navigate the inevitable storms. And Buddhism has a lot to say about facing life's challenges, particularly those moments of suffering. There's a powerful story in the text about a grieving mother named Kisa Gotami, which really illustrates the Buddhist perspective on impermanence.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this story and what it teaches us about suffering.
Kisa Gotami was desperate to bring her child back to life and went to the Buddha for help. He told her to find a mustard seed from a household that had never experienced death. Of course, she couldn't find one.
Right.
And through this, she came to understand the universality of death and the impermanence of all things.
That's such a poignant way to illustrate impermanence. It's a reminder that everything is in constant flux, and that includes our own lives. Does Buddhism offer any solace in the face of this reality?
Absolutely. Buddhism acknowledges the reality of suffering, but it doesn't leave us in despair. Instead, it points to the possibility of liberation from suffering. The text uses powerful imagery of how death affects everyone equally, even kings.
Right.
No one escapes impermanence, and that's where the preciousness of human life comes in. This life is so valuable because it gives us the opportunity to wake up, to break free from the cycle of suffering.
It sounds like a call to action to make the most of this opportunity. I'm curious, though, about those who have gone deeper on this path, those who've achieved advanced levels of practice. What can we learn from their experiences?
The text mentions these incredibly advanced states called formless attainments.
Hmm.
In these states, you go beyond the limitations of form and even perception itself. It's like transcending everything we normally experience.
Right.
There's also mention of supernormal powers,
Hmm.
like being able to be in multiple places at once or hear sounds from very far away.
Hold on, superpowers. Are we talking telepathy and levitation here?
Yes, those are some of the powers described.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand that these powers are not the goal of Buddhist practice. They might arise as a byproduct of deep meditative concentration. But clinging to them can actually hinder your progress on the path.
So it's not about becoming a superhero, but about using any insights or abilities to benefit others.
Precisely. And that brings us to the Bodhisattva path, a central tenet of Mahayana Buddhism, which is all about dedicating your life to helping all beings achieve enlightenment.
This is fascinating. So instead of seeking personal liberation, a bodhisattva is driven by compassion for all beings. That's quite a commitment.
It is indeed. And to achieve this, bodhisattvas cultivate 6 perfections, like wisdom and compassion. These qualities guide their actions in the world.
So it's a beautiful blend of wisdom and compassion guiding their actions in the world. This is also fascinating. Before we move on, I want to circle back to a concept we briefly touched on, karma. What's the real deal with karma?
It's not just what goes around comes around like some people think. Karma is more about intention. It's about the choices we make and the actions that come from those choices.
Ah, so our motivation behind our actions matters. It's not just about what we do, but why we do it. That makes a lot of sense. So if it's all about intention, does that mean we have the power to change our karma, to create a more positive future?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of free will and responsibility.
Mm.
Buddhism teaches that we have agency. We can make choices that shape our experience. It's not about being puppets of fate. We have a role to play.
So we can't just blame our past actions or some external force for our current situation. We have the power to make choices that shape our present and future. That's empowering. But what about the ultimate goal in Buddhism, nirvana? What does that really mean?
Nirvana is described as deathless and timeless, a state that goes beyond our usual ideas of existence. It's not about going to heaven or some blissful paradise,
Right.
but rather a state of liberation from suffering. And the text even hints that this potential for awakening, for nirvana, is inherent in all beings.
Wow, so we all have the seed of Buddhahood within us. That's pretty mind-blowing. But how do we cultivate that seed? I'm ready to dive deeper into these practices and see how they can be applied to my own life.
Well, hold on to that enthusiasm because in our next segment, we're going to explore some of the specific practices and tools Buddhism offers for cultivating mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion. We'll unpack those 4 foundations of mindfulness and see how they can be applied to everyday life.
I can't wait. It sounds like we're just getting started on this journey of discovery. Stay tuned, listeners, because this deep dive is just getting interesting.
Welcome back to our exploration of Buddhist thought. Last time, we talked about these incredible formless attainments, these states of awareness beyond form and perception. It left me wondering, are those states really so far out of reach?
Right. It's like you're suggesting we can access those glimpses of formless awareness right here, right now in our everyday lives. How do we even begin to tap into that?
Well, the path unfolds pretty naturally, actually. If you recall our discussion about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, those are key. Cultivating that present moment awareness is like laying the groundwork for accessing deeper states. It's about cultivating both calm and insight.
So instead of escaping reality, we need to pay closer attention to it. Does that mean even small moments of mindfulness can make a difference?
Absolutely. Even just recognizing the spaciousness of your own awareness, the way thoughts come and go like clouds, can be incredibly liberating. You don't have to empty your mind completely. Just see through the illusion that you are your thoughts.
So instead of getting caught up in that constant chatter, we can observe it with a sense of detachment. But doesn't that require a lot of discipline, years of dedicated practice? Where do we even begin?
It's a path for sure, but the practice itself is the path. We
Okay.
don't have to wait for some distant future goal. The text actually emphasizes that real knowledge comes from direct experience, not blindly following dogma. It's an invitation to investigate your own experience.
So it's like we're scientists of our own minds, observing and drawing conclusions based on what we see. But how do we deal with those inevitable emotional storms that cloud our awareness? Those moments of anger, frustration, sadness, the stuff that really throws us off balance.
That's where those limitless qualities, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity become so important. They're like antidotes to those difficult emotions. Instead of getting swept away by negativity, we can use these qualities to transform our relationship to our experience.
So we're not just being mindful in the moment. We're actively cultivating qualities that can change our whole way of being in the world. It sounds like creating a more positive internal landscape. But is that even possible? And we're bombarded with so much external negativity. Can we really transform those deep-seated patterns?
Buddhism says yes, absolutely. Transformation is at the heart of the path. Remember the story of Angulimala, the notorious bandit who became an enlightened monk?
Oh, yeah, that's a crazy story. From a ruthless killer to a peaceful monk. How did such a dramatic shift even happen? What was the turning point?
It was a direct encounter with the Buddha.
Okay.
Angulimala, filled with murderous intent, chased after the Buddha but couldn't catch him. Exhausted, he yelled, "Stop, monk!" The Buddha simply replied, "I have stopped, Angulimala. It is you who have not stopped." That's when it hit Angulimala. The violence was within him, not out there. He saw the possibility of a different path.
It's like the Buddha held up a mirror, reflecting Angulimala's own inner state. It's a powerful reminder that transformation is possible for anyone, but we've been focusing on personal transformation.
Right.
What about the social and ethical dimensions of Buddhism? How does all this relate to the world around us?
That's a great point. It's not just about individual enlightenment.
Hmm.
It's about creating a more just and compassionate world. The text talks about the principles of good governance, outlining ideas that promote peace and harmony in society.
Uh-huh.
It's about ethical conduct, fairness, and respecting elders.
So Buddhism isn't just about meditating on a cushion, it's about engaging with the world in a skillful and compassionate way.
Right. And it emphasizes that true leadership should be guided by wisdom and compassion, putting the well-being of all front and center. But how do we live that out in the complexities of modern life?
Right.
We're constantly bombarded with information, pressure to consume, and all sorts of challenges. How do we navigate all of that?
It can feel overwhelming, for sure. Does Buddhism offer any guidance for dealing with those pressures?
Absolutely. The text highlights the importance of contentment and generosity. It reminds us that real happiness isn't about material possessions or chasing fleeting pleasures. It's about finding inner peace and extending kindness to others.
So shifting our focus from external validation to inner fulfillment. I love that. But what about work? Can our jobs be part of our spiritual path, or are they just a means to an end?
The text talks about right livelihood, encouraging us to find work that aligns with ethical principles. It's about making a living that doesn't harm others or go against your values. So yes, your work can definitely be an expression of your spiritual path.
That's encouraging. It seems like Buddhism encourages a holistic approach, bringing mindfulness and compassion into all aspects of life. But what about the role of women in Buddhism? I'm curious, have they always been seen as equals on the path to enlightenment?
That's a great question, and it has a complicated history. While early Buddhist texts acknowledge the potential for women to achieve enlightenment, they also contain some passages that reflect the patriarchal views of ancient India. But there are inspiring stories of female practitioners who achieved great spiritual heights. One example is Isidasi, a woman who faced many challenges but ultimately achieved liberation through her unwavering determination.
Her story reminds us that the path is open to everyone, regardless of gender or social status. It's inspiring to see that reflected in the tradition. Speaking of the tradition, I'm curious about the role of faith in Buddhism. Is belief a prerequisite for following the path? Do I have to believe certain things to benefit from these teachings?
That's a common question. The text describes faith more as trustful confidence, a quality of the heart rather than a rigid set of beliefs.
Okay.
It's about developing trust in the teachings and in your own potential to awaken.
So it's not about blind faith, but about approaching these teachings with an open mind and a willingness to see for yourself. It's like that scientific approach we talked about earlier.
Exactly. It's about testing the teachings against your own experience.
Mhm.
And remember, you don't have to walk this path alone.
Mhm.
We talked about the importance of spiritual friendship,
Right.
but the text also emphasizes the transformative power of the three jewels. the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. You have the guidance of the teachings, the inspiration of the Buddha, and the support of the community to help you along the way.
It's like tapping into this ancient stream of wisdom and compassion, connecting us to all the practitioners who have walked this path before us. It's pretty remarkable to think about it that way. But before we get lost in the vastness of it all, let's bring it back down to earth. Remember that question we had earlier about accessing formless awareness in everyday life?
Hmm.
Let's explore that further.
That's a perfect transition to the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the practical intersection of mindfulness, everyday life, and the potential that lies within each moment.
We've been on quite the journey exploring these Buddhist teachings, from the core principles to the depths of meditative practice. It's inspiring, but I have to admit, I'm wondering how it all translates to everyday life. How do we bring these profound ideas down from the mountaintop, so to speak, and integrate them into the nitty-gritty of our daily experience?
That's the key question, isn't it? It's where the rubber meets the road. Remember those 4 foundations of mindfulness we talked about?
Huh?
Those aren't just abstract concepts. They're tools we can use to navigate the ups and downs of life.
Okay, I'm all about practical tools. Give me some real-world examples of how we can use these foundations in our daily lives.
Well, let's take mindfulness of the body.
Okay.
It's about paying attention to the sensations of breathing, posture, movement, even just noticing your heartbeat or your digestion. It's about tuning into your body without judgment, simply observing what's happening.
So even something as basic as paying attention to my breath can be a mindfulness practice.
Absolutely. It's about anchoring your attention in the present moment. Notice the rise and fall of your breath, the gentle expansion and contraction of your chest. As you cultivate this awareness, you might notice your mind becoming calmer and more focused.
It's like gently guiding your attention back to the breath whenever it wanders off, like training a puppy.
Yeah.
But how does this help with the stress of daily life? Like when I'm facing a tough deadline at work and feeling overwhelmed?
Imagine this.
Yeah.
You're facing that deadline, feeling the pressure mounting. Instead of getting swept away by anxious thoughts, you pause and take a few conscious breaths.
Okay.
Notice where you feel tension in your body.
Uh-huh.
Maybe your shoulders are tight, or there's a knot in your stomach.
Right.
Simply acknowledging those sensations without resisting them can create a little space between the stress and your reaction to it.
So it's not about making the stress magically disappear, but about shifting how we relate to it. Does that make sense?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that these sensations are impermanent, they'll pass.
Yeah.
By bringing mindfulness to them, you can avoid getting caught in that spiral of reactivity, that endless loop of stress and worry.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about when those really big emotions hit? Anger, frustration, even grief?
Yeah.
Can mindfulness really help us in those moments?
It can be incredibly helpful. Let's say someone cuts you off in traffic and you feel that surge of anger rising. Instead of reacting impulsively, you can take a breath and simply notice the sensations of anger in your body. Maybe your face feels hot or your hands clench into fists.
I'm seeing a theme here. Pause, breathe, observe. It sounds so simple, but I can imagine it's not always easy to do in those heated moments.
It takes practice, no doubt. And that's where the teachings on patience and loving kindness come in. Instead of meeting anger with more anger, we can cultivate a sense of compassion, even toward those who we feel have wronged us.
It's like remembering that everyone is on their own journey and we all make mistakes. It's about responding with understanding instead of judgment.
Exactly. And to be more compassionate through deliberate practice. Imagine sending well wishes to yourself and others, wishing for happiness and well-being.
Right.
It might sound cheesy, but it can have a profound impact on how you experience the world.
So we're not just trying to be more present, but also actively cultivating positive qualities that can transform how we interact with the world. But how does this all connect back to that ultimate goal of liberation from suffering to nirvana?
That's a great question. Remember our discussion about nirvana being a deathless, timeless state beyond our typical concepts of existence?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mind bender. So how do we actually get there from here? Is it about reaching some future state, or is it about how we live right now?
The text challenges our idea of a permanent self.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests we're more like a flow of processes than a fixed entity.
Okay.
It even uses imagery like bubbles and mirages to describe the body, pointing to the illusory nature of this self we cling to.
So by practicing mindfulness, we start to see through the illusion of a separate self, the ego that's always grasping and clinging, causing so much suffering.
Exactly. As you loosen the grip on that illusion, you naturally open yourself up to the possibility of liberation. It's not about reaching some far-off state in the future, but about awakening to the truth of your
Gotcha.
experience right here, right now.
It's like we're peeling away layers of conditioning to reveal our true nature, that radiant potential that's always been there. But honestly, all this talk about different Buddhist schools and complex practices can feel a bit overwhelming.
I hear you. It's a vast tradition, for sure. But remember the analogy of the raft. The Buddha used that to explain that the teachings are a tool to help us cross the river of suffering, not something to cling to. You can benefit from them without getting lost in the details.
So it's about finding the essence, the practical wisdom that can guide our lives. But where do we go from here? What's the next step on this path of awakening?
Here's something to ponder as you continue on your journey. What if the real path isn't something you create, but something you discover? What if awakening is about uncovering the wisdom that's already within you, that innate Buddha nature that's your birthright? Keep practicing, keep learning, keep exploring, and see what you find.
That's a beautiful thought to leave us with. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of Buddhist thought, but I'm walking away with a sense of wonder and inspiration. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
It's been a joy to dive into this with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of life.